if nobody shows up, do you still have to do the presentation?
Well, I'm going to do my presentation for Christiana.
Oh,
Oh,
oh, here she is. Hello.
hi, ladies. It's so lovely to see both of your faces.
I've been following your thread about the porch.
Oh, I am so impressed with the answers that I'm getting, and I'm very happy because they're actual like meaty responses to help me figure out how to counsel this property owner. Because
Okay, good. Because
Yeah.
I have to admit, they kind of go like this for me a little bit.
yeah,
Like, oh.
and it's like an awkward, weird situation, and I just think the preservation board is kind of being a little unnecessary, but what they're doing is what a lot of people recommended as that their commissions would do. So again, not sure, like,
Oh,
is
wow.
that what should happen, or are they all just making bad decisions?
Right.
So, but it was a lot of, I was very impressed by the responses I got.
Yeah. People had a lot to say.
I know. I'm glad I almost didn't include the pictures, so I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Always gives people a reference point. Yeah.
Well, I hope people show up. But Tabitha told me there weren't that many people at the Thursday night one.
No, not on Thursday. Yeah.
I think 6, right?
Say again?
I think it was about 6.
I think it was about 6 total, but again, I think it was you and Crystal, so
And then Tabitha. So.
and Tabitha, yeah. So there were like 3 real people. You know, the guy that bought Lakeview, which, you know, I'm so disappointed that he didn't speak up in terms of like, oh, that's the house I just bought. So you'll see that I'll point out the image.
All
I
right.
go through things. I will give stragglers till 6:03.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Otherwise, this will be a nice opportunity, Christiana, quite honestly, to kind of for you to kind of just see where things are at a little bit, because
I'm
this is somewhat an encapsulation of that. So
Excellent. And then, yeah, I think maybe for later this summer into the fall, like the 3 of us could coordinate for just like regular educational programming and just like get some like preservation 101 Zooms out there and stuff like that to like, as this is moving through the, you know, the approval process, having those happening. I think that would be really great.
Yeah. I guess what the point I'm getting at is trying to and I, you know, because there's so many variables that inform it, but in terms of, is it realistic to think that this could be an ordinance adopted by the end of the year?
Yeah. I mean, scheduling wise, yeah. You know what I mean? And if no one is going to speak up against or have any sort of opinion on the matter.
Right. See, I'm going to give you about 64% convincing on that.
Yeah. I don't know enough about the political situation in Jamestown. I mean, in Buffalo, nothing could have, there would be no passing of laws that quickly. No, not with our administration. That wouldn't happen.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's like, there's so many variables and every place is so different. So yeah, totally. All right. It's 6:03.
We're ready.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight's presentation is really primarily to give a framework and a context to the efforts that are happening in Jamestown towards the adoption of a local preservation ordinance. So to kind of give some background and some drivers of that otherwise. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see. All right, can you see my screen?
Yepers.
Yeah. And what do you see?
Oh, we see the
JTNY.
Yeah.
Now, do you see the presentation, or do you see display settings?
No, I thought it was the display for a second, but it's the presentation.
Okay, excellent. Okay, all right. Okay, so this is the arcade building that we are lucky enough to be having some forward movement on. It has been listed on Preservation New York's 7 to Save. And so it looks as though it's going to be saved, and we're really excited about that. But basically, because of the affirming support for and response to the establishment of historic neighborhoods in Jamestown, the city is taking steps to establish a local preservation ordinance. This will be referred to as an LPO, just going forward through the presentation. It will provide our valuable building stock with legal protections that federal statutes do not address. An LPO expands the city's toolbox in saving meaningful structures and having the ability to explore a range of options in addressing an unsightly or unsafe structure. The city is committed to striving for positive outcomes that result from honoring private property rights concurrently with the realization of goals for our community at large. And so this is the house that has been recently purchased. And it's been quite a journey for this house in terms of having a fair amount of interest, but ultimately not a lot of viable pathways for people to otherwise kind of take this on. But just to kind of give some context to where we're approaching this, Jamestown has the oldest building stock in the region. Of Jamestown's 14,000 plus parcels, 96% are older than 50 years old, 78% are older than 75 years old, and 59% of the residential structures in Jamestown were built more than 100 years ago. And so that kind of gives you an idea of kind of what the landscape looks like. So truth number one, these are places and spaces that hold valuable history, stories, and character by virtue of their survival. And truth number two, these are places and spaces that may be subject to long-term vacancy, abandonment, or deterioration due to disinvestment and neglect. And so really where that kind of puts us is that our challenge is what we refer to as VADs, vacant, abandoned, deteriorated properties. And it's not someplace that you get to overnight. There's a nice long process to take us there, starting with a property that has neglected maintenance or updates to it. And that typically leads us to what we all kind of know as an eyesore. And so because it's an eyesore, it's unpleasant to look at. It might even be unpleasant to live in at that point. And that leads it to a state of diminished appeal or complete loss of appeal otherwise. And with that, we're seeing at least subsequent, if not concurrent, emergence of safety issues with the building. And so now it's not just unpleasant to look at, it's unsafe to live in. And so now we have diminished function or a complete loss of function. So now we have no appeal, no function. And so we don't really have much use for the building anymore. And so we've really got two options as to how to respond to that loss of use that comes from that loss of appeal and function. And we can either restore and reuse the structure, or we can let it continue on to its path of demolition by neglect. So in terms of what that can look like, in terms of just what that process can look like, not just in a bunch of words, but we kind of start out with something that looks pretty good, operates pretty well. And if we're not maintaining it, becomes unpleasant, there's safety issues. And so we kind of end up with something like this, unfortunately. And then we're faced with this decision as to whether to restore or reuse, or in this case, they chose demolition by neglect. So similarly, just in a different kind of context, very different architecture, but I would be hard pressed for anyone to think that that is not impressive architecture, and architecture to the point where you would think, well, that someone would always take care of something that looked like that. But if it goes through the same kind of process, we end up with this. And so that is the remaining structure in that landscape. And it's hard to grasp a little bit, but that's the reality of it. So this is where we had kind of done a poll previously to kind of get a gauge as to, well, if you saw a building like this, would you restore it or would you demolish it? And fortunately, they restored it, right? And again, if you saw something like this, would you think it should be demolished or do you think it could be saved? And fortunately, they thought it could be saved. And similarly, it's not looking too good, not looking too hot, but they did seem that it was worth saving and kind of turn things around for there. And so what these turnarounds represent is a response to that challenge of vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties into using the tool of preservation. And really, preservation is just the maintenance, restoration, or rehabilitation of a structure that sustains the structure's useful life beyond the impact of neglect, substandard work, or questionable design choices. And the objective of preservation is really just to ensure that a structure or an area can be used and enjoyed not just today, but also into the future. Because again, if that's not the case, we kind of replace the image on the left with this, and we replace the image on the right with that. And so in terms of moving into historic preservation, which is just a specific kind of preservation, historic preservation takes all of the elements of general preservation and gives that preservation a broader context and a deeper narrative. Every city has a story to tell, and an integral character of that story is its buildings. The loss of buildings changes the story of Jamestown. It unwinds our efforts for progress and unravels our threads that originally knit Jamestown's fabric. There's nothing wrong with new construction when it is done with intention and reflection about balancing the past and the future. New buildings can create unintended consequences of not only erasing history, but really more importantly to me and more of an adverse impact is the rewriting of history. So preservation and progress must be two symbiotic sides of the same coin. Now, the good news is one of the great benefits of historic preservation is that it is a proven community stabilizer. The emphasis on economic growth and community prosperity contributes to the perception that a city starts and ends at its business and employment opportunities. This leaves a significant part of the story being untold. Preserving our buildings allows those stories to continue, to endure and evolve, enabling Jamestown to provide residents, workers, and visitors both something to return to and to discover for those longtime residents. So we might think of historic preservation being about stopping time or freezing something in the past. But in fact, historic preservation today, as well as in the past, has always been about managing change, because as we all know, that's the one thing that is consistent is change. So in terms of this snapshot of the idea of community stabilization, what does that really mean? What can that look like? And so, here's, I think, an interesting graph in terms of just kind of giving some benchmarks as to some of the criteria to consider and kind of ways to describe stability in a neighborhood in terms of a place that keeps sufficiently abreast of its challenges. So again, managing that change. And so a socially resilient place, again, resiliency is something that has to exist in relationship to change. So again, if there is no change, you don't really need to be resilient to anything. So again, that's also indicating how much we're managing change with historic preservation. Economically, of course, we don't want to discount that. There's nothing that we want to diminish that element of things, but a stable neighborhood is certainly where residents feel like they're getting a good return on their financial investment. And it's also where people just have confidence in the neighborhood. And all of these things, can be colored in different ways in terms of how we define confidence and kind of what those things kind of, what we have confidence in, whether that's safety, whether that's cleanliness, whether that's activities and community connections in that. But again, where those things come together. So we do have a fair representation of historic preservation in Jamestown currently. So we have National Historic Districts, our Downtown District, our Lakeview Avenue District, and our Forest Heights District. This is about 5% of the city's residential building stock. And in terms of our local historic districts, we don't have any because we don't have a local preservation ordinance. Now, similarly, we do boast a number of national historic landmarks, such as the Euclid Avenue School and the Fenton History Center and the Jackson Center and the Partridge Sheldon House, otherwise known as the Daughters of the American Revolution House, and the Wellman Building and the Jamestown Armory, the Erie Railroad Station, now known as the National Comedy Center. And as far as our local historic landmarks go, again, they don't have any. We need a local preservation ordinance for that. And so a local preservation ordinance is a local statute enacted to protect buildings and neighborhoods from unnecessary demolition or insensitive rehabilitation that adversely impacts the community. It also establishes a design review board, a preservation commission, and processes, all of which are critical for securing local historic designation. An LPO enables a community to protect its sense of place, maintain and revitalize its downtown and older neighborhoods, increase community pride, and reinforce overall economic development. An LPO fosters local businesses, keeping historic main streets and downtowns economically viable, stimulates investment, and promotes tourism. So again, it's the kind of thing that 31 South Main Street may still look like this if we had had an LPO, but instead it looks like this now. So just to kind of reinforce what some of the things that we've missed opportunities on, back in the day, we had a 500 Pine Street that looked like this, and today it looks like that. And once upon a time, we had a 313 Prendergast that looked like this, and today it looks like that. And once upon a time, we had a 518 North Main Street that looked like this, and now it looks like that. And unfortunately, we have even more examples. 611 Prendergast. Now it looks like this. And 303 West 3rd. Now it looks like this, and it's not to diminish the contribution that the arena has made to the city, but just to kind of give an idea of, you know, what was lost to make room for progress. So it's always a tough balance. And then once in a while, like 139 Forest, we get it right. So we want to see more of that, basically. So some of the questions that arise is, you know, how is the LPO going to affect my property? And so one of the questions that you want to ask relative to that is, do you own a designated historic landmark, or do you own a property located in a designated historic district? If the answer is no, then your property is neither protected by the LPO policies and it's not subject to the LPO regulations. On the other hand, yes, then your property is protected by LPO policies and subject to the LPO regulations. And of course, one of the big questions is about demolition, because that has been something that has been normalized here in Jamestown as the solution and the response to challenged properties. And so, you know, if I purchase a property that's not in a designated historic landmark or located in a designated historic district that I want to demolish, can I just do that, since again, that's not, it's not in that property? Well, it's not going to necessarily be that simple. One of the protections and regulations that would likely be included in the LPO is what we call a demolition delay. And that statute would typically apply to buildings or homes of a certain age. This would be established within the ordinance, whether that the ordinance would identify that section by how old the building is or when it was constructed. And so if your property fits that criteria, your application for a demolition permit would trigger a review, and that review could result in a demolition delay. Now, it's not to say that that review would automatically deny your demolition. It would just allow for that period of time for this layer of oversight to see what other alternatives there would be. So the demolition would really be the solution of last resort rather than first resort, or even middle resort for that matter. Is there a middle resort? Who knows? And so I'm not going to run through these word for word. It's just to kind of put them up to each other, and these will be on the city website. So you can go through the slides at your own pace and kind of look a little bit deeper at some of them, in particular this page, if you're curious about kind of what the biggest distinctions are between the national recognition and the local recognition of historic structures otherwise. And that's all I've got for tonight.
Great.
So thank you. And I will take questions.
That was a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Christiana. That means a lot coming from you. I appreciate it.
And I mean, I think you probably heard me screenshotting the whole, like, that was really good. So the slides will be available on the city's website.
Yes.
And then the recordings, either these recordings or you just stagnant recording, is that going to be available for people too?
You mean from the Zoom meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, because I'm saying like you're very good at, I mean, I wasn't expecting you to be bad at presenting, but like you just make it sound so much easier to understand. Like your
Okay,
voice
thank
is very
you.
comforting. So
Okay.
like making sure that like you have that out there to explain, because I think it would definitely help for some people who this is a
Okay.
brand new topic. But
Okay.
that was incredibly informative. I really thought that was wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, I am humbled. Okay.
Oh my gosh. I have one tiny suggestion.
Yes, please.
On that one slide where it's the National Register districts, and then you have the individual landmarks, you gotta add the word register so it says National Register Historic District or National Register Landmarks, because National Historic Landmarks is actually a separate designation.
Oh, okay.
And I think maybe one of them actually is an NHL, but all the rest
Okay.
of them were just individually listed. Again, super, zero
Right,
in
right. But
expert thing that
that's
only
the granular
5 of us are going to
stuff
know.
Okay. Yeah.
But that little thing. But other than that, I think that presented the information quite well. I'm really sad that there's no one else here to have enjoyed that.
Had a few. Yeah.
So what is the plan moving forward now? I mean, we joked in the beginning about how quickly we could get that passed, but what is the projected timeline moving forward?
Yours is a very good question.
Okay.
I mean, at this point, kind of checking off our public meetings.
Right.
In terms of checking that box, we can start to otherwise really put some more effort into the crafting of the ordinance. And again, we've got the draft
Right.
that came from the sample ordinance. And so I guess I don't know how much we need to what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know how much I really need to otherwise excavate from here, there, or someplace else to either add to the draft, or whether the draft should just kind of be pushed forward to the next step, or whether there's more work to do on drafting it.
I mean, I don't know where you have it now, but I mean, where we left it the last time I saw it, it was just those little nitpicky things that like corporation counsel needed to check and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's totally up to you guys. And the email I sent you today about like the task force or the coalition or whatever moving forward, I mean, I think it's up to the mayor. And I don't know how they're gonna